The red dust of the Arizona territory hung in the air like dried blood, settling into every crack and crevice of Captain Elias Monroe's weathered face. He sat on the porch of his log cabin, perched high on the mesa where the wind never ceased its mournful song. The year was 1871, 6 years since the war had ended. But for Elias, the battles still raged in the darkness behind his eyelids every time he tried to sleep. His hands, once steady enough to thread a needle in the midst of cannon fire, now trembled slightly as he cleaned his Colt .45. The scars that crisscrossed his knuckles caught the dying light of the sun, each mark a memory he'd rather forget. The deepest scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from Antietam that had left him deaf in one ear and prone to headaches that felt like artillery shells exploding in his skull. The landscape before him was as unforgiving as his memories. The desert stretched endlessly, cracked earth punctuated by stubborn yucca plants and ancient saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the copper sky. Dust devils danced in the distance, and the heat waves made everything shimmer as if the world itself was uncertain of its form. Elias had chosen this isolation deliberately. After mustering out of the Union Army, he'd served briefly as a lawman in Tucson, but the weight of enforcing order when he could barely maintain it within himself had proven too much. Now he lived alone, save for his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Ruth after his sister who'd died of fever while he was at war. The nightmares came regularly. Sometimes it was the face of the Confederate boy at Chancellorsville. Couldn't have been more than 15, whom Elias had run through with his saber. Other times it was the field hospital at Gettysburg, the screams of men having limbs sawed off without enough laudanum to dull the agony. But the worst was always the same, a young drummer boy at Petersburg, waving a white flag, whom Elias had shot in the chaos of battle before realizing the child was trying to surrender. He took a long pull from his flask, the whiskey burning less than the memories. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of creosote and the faint hint of rain from storms that would never reach this forsaken place. Elias knew he should head inside soon. The desert nights could turn cold enough to freeze a man's blood, but something kept him on that porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the desert's evening symphony. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or perhaps a wounded animal, but as he strained his good ear, he recognized it for what it was. Human crying. Soft, desperate sobs carried on the wind from somewhere near the dry creek bed that wound through the canyon below. Elias stood slowly, his joints protesting after sitting too long. He strapped on his gun belt, grabbed a lantern, and made his way to where Ruth was hobbled near a patch of sparse grass. The mare nickered softly as he saddled her, her breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. The descent down the rocky trail was treacherous in the gathering darkness. More than once, Ruth's hooves slipped on loose stones, sending cascades of pebbles into the void below. Elias kept the lantern shuttered, relying on the faint moonlight and his knowledge of the terrain. The crying grew louder as he approached the creek bed, interspersed now with what sounded like ragged breathing and the occasional whimper of fear. He found her huddled against a boulder where the creek made a sharp bend. In the pale moonlight, she looked like a ghost, a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, her dress torn and muddied, hair hanging in wet tangles around her face. She was soaked through, though the creek had been dry for months, and her hands were scraped raw as if she'd been climbing or falling among the rocks. When his shadow fell across her, she looked up with eyes wide with terror. Even in the darkness, Elias could see the tears cutting trails through the dirt on her face. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the rock as if she could disappear into it. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please don't tell them you found me. I can't go back. I can't." Elias raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Miss, I'm not looking to tell anyone anything. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then seemed to reconsider and nodded. Her whole body was trembling, whether from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. Probably both. "They're coming for me," she said, the words tumbling out between chattering teeth. "They'll find me." And when they do, she couldn't finish, dissolving into fresh sobs. Elias had seen plenty of people in distress during his years as a soldier and lawman. He'd learned to recognize the difference between dramatics and genuine terror. This woman, this girl, really was truly afraid for her life. He should have left her there. That's what the old Elias would have done, the one who believed in law and order and the proper way of things. But something in her eyes, the desperate pleading in them, stirred something in his chest that he'd thought the war had killed. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. She nodded again, struggling to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, and Elias caught her elbow to steady her. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "My cabin's about 3 miles up the mesa," he said. "You can warm up there, get some food in you. Then you can decide what to do next." "Why?" she asked, searching his scarred face. "Why would you help me?" Elias didn't have an answer for that. Maybe it was the tears. Maybe it was the way she reminded him of his sister, though Ruth had been blonde and this girl's hair was dark as midnight. Or maybe he was just tired of being alone with his ghosts. "Because the desert's no place for anyone to die alone," he said finally. He helped her onto Ruth, then swung up behind her. She was light as a bird and twice as fragile. As they began the climb back up the trail, she leaned back against him, whether from exhaustion or trust. He didn't know. "My name is Mara," she said softly. "Mara Langley. Captain Elias Monroe," he replied, then caught himself. "Just Elias now." The cabin looked even more isolated when they reached it. A small island of human habitation in an ocean of wilderness. Elias helped Mara down and led her inside. The main room was sparse but clean. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and a stone fireplace that he quickly set about filling with kindling. As the fire caught and began to warm the room, Elias could see Mara more clearly. She was pretty beneath the dirt and tear stains, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of desert sage. Her dress, though torn, was made of fine fabric. She clearly wasn't from farming stock. He heated some beans and salt pork, poured her coffee from the pot that always sat on the hearth. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which might have been the truth. When she finished, she wrapped her hands around the tin cup, savoring its warmth. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to stand. "I've brought you trouble just by being here." "Desert's full of trouble," Elias said, settling into the chair across from her. "A little more won't make much difference." She studied him then, taking in the scars, the controlled way he moved, the rifle propped within easy reach by the door. "You were a soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. "Was." He agreed. "And now?" "Now I'm just a man trying to find some peace." She laughed, but it was bitter. "Peace. I used to know what that was." Elias didn't press. In his experience, people talked when they were ready, not before. He got up and found an old shirt and some pants that had belonged to a smaller man who died owing him money. "These'll be too big, but they're dry," he said, setting them on the bed. "I'll step outside while you change." He stood on the porch again, looking out at the star-filled sky. From inside, he could hear the rustle of fabric, the soft pad of bare feet on wooden floors. When she called him back in, she looked almost comical in the oversized clothes, but also younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you," she said simply. Elias nodded and began laying out bedrolls by the fire. "You take the bed. I'm used to the floor." "I couldn't." "You can and you will," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Get some rest. Whatever's chasing you will still be there in the morning, and you'll need your strength." She moved toward the bed, then paused. "Elias, what if they come here?" He met her eyes steadily. "Then they'll find out why the Apache still tells stories about the one-eared captain who wouldn't die." For the first time since he'd found her, Mara Langley smiled. It was small and fleeting, but it transformed her face, hinting at who she might have been before whatever had driven her to cry alone in a dry creek bed in the middle of nowhere. As she settled into the bed and Elias prepared his own sleeping spot by the fire, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. But, for the first time in years, The prospect of trouble didn't fill him with dread. Instead, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: purpose. The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. But inside the cabin, for now at least, there was warmth and safety. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, neither of them would face their demons alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor when Mara finally spoke of what had driven her into the desert. She sat at the rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around a cup of chicory coffee, looking smaller than ever in Elias's borrowed clothes. "His name is Cornelius Blackwood," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father owed him money, gambling debts from the silver mines that went bust. When Father died last winter, Mr. Blackwood came to collect." She paused, her knuckles white around the cup. "He said I could work off the debt or I could marry him." Elias remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. He'd seen enough of frontier justice to know how these stories usually went. "Cornelius is 40 years older than me, and he's not a kind man." Her voice caught. "His first 2 wives died young. People whisper about it, but his family owns half the territory. The Blackwoods came out here in '49, made their fortune in gold, then cattle. They own the bank, the newspaper, even the sheriff." "Where?" Elias asked quietly. "Silver Creek, about 60 miles south." She looked up at him then, her sage-green eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. 3 nights ago, there was a party at his house. He'd been drinking heavily, celebrating our engagement. He cornered me on the upstairs balcony, tried to—" She shuddered. "When I pushed him away, he grabbed me, tore my dress. We struggled, and he lost his balance. The railing was old, rotted through. He fell." Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Did he survive?" "I don't know. I didn't stay to find out. I heard shouting, saw lanterns coming, and I ran, took a horse from their stable and rode until it collapsed. Then I walked." She held up her scraped hands. "I've been running for 3 days." "And they're saying you pushed him." His son William saw us on the balcony. He'd never liked me, thought I was beneath their family. He started shouting that I'd murdered his father before I even reached the stairs. Tears began to roll down her cheeks again. "Even if Cornelius survived, they'll say I attempted murder. And if he didn't—" Elias got up and poured himself coffee, thinking, in his lawman days, he would have insisted she return, face trial, trust in justice. But he'd seen too much of frontier justice to believe in it anymore. The Blackwoods' money would buy judge and jury. Mara Langley would hang whether Cornelius lived or died. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, not unkindly. She reached into the pocket of the borrowed pants and pulled out a small, water-stained book. "My diary," she said, pushing it across the table. "I've been writing in it since my mother taught me letters. Everything's there: Father's debts, Cornelius's threats, what he did to his wives." "I know it's just my word, but—" Elias didn't open the diary. The fact that she'd kept it through 3 days of flight told him enough. "Keep it hidden," he said. "If they find you with evidence against them, it'll go worse." Days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Elias had expected Mara to be useless, a town girl playing at frontier life. But she surprised him. She took over the cooking without being asked, and while her first attempts at biscuits could have been used as ammunition, she learned quickly. She mended his clothes with tiny, precise stitches, swept the floors, organized his meager supplies. "My mother was a seamstress before she married Father," she explained one evening as she darned a hole in his shirt. "She taught me that idle hands make worried minds." Elias found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she hummed softly while she worked, how she'd pause to watch the sunset through the window, the careful way she rationed their supplies to make them last. She was trying so hard to be useful, to earn her keep, as if kindness had to be paid for. He taught her practical things in return: how to bank a fire so it would last through the night, how to tell direction by the stars, which cacti held water and which would poison you. She was a quick study, absorbing everything with an intensity that spoke of someone who knew knowledge might be the only currency that mattered. One afternoon, while showing her how to set a rabbit snare, their hands accidentally touched, both pulled back as if burned, and Elias saw color rise in her cheeks. That night, she seemed particularly interested in her mending, while he found urgent need to check on Ruth multiple times. It was near the end of the first week when Elias woke to find Mara sitting by the dying fire, clutching something to her chest and crying silently. In the dim light, he could see it was a handkerchief, embroidered with initials he couldn't make out. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. She shook her head. "My brother Thomas gave me this when I left home. He's only 12. Cornelius threatened to send him to work in the mines if I didn't agree to the marriage." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't even know if he's safe." Elias moved to sit beside her on the floor, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Tell me about him." "He's smart," she said, smiling through her tears. "Loves books more than anything. Wants to be a teacher someday. He has our mother's gentle heart." She folded the handkerchief carefully. "I practically raised him after she died. He must be so frightened. If the Blackwoods want you, they'll keep him safe," Elias said. "He's their leverage. You don't know them. They're capable of anything." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight, he could see the desperation in her eyes. "I can't hide here forever, but if I go back, if I turn myself in—" "You'll hang," Elias finished bluntly. "Guilty or innocent won't matter. Then what do I do?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the embers. "You survive," he said finally. "You wait, you plan, and when the time comes, you fight smart, not fair. Is that what you did, in the war?" Elias felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with war memories. "The war was different. We knew who the enemy was. We wore uniforms, followed rules, most of the time. Anyway," he rubbed his scarred temple absently. "This is more like Apache fighting. Strike from shadow, disappear, make them doubt their own shadows." Mara was quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you regret it, being a soldier?" "I regret surviving when better men didn't." He said honestly, "I regret the things I did in the name of duty, but mostly, I regret that it didn't change anything. The powerful still prey on the weak. Justice is still for sale. The only difference is the color of the uniforms." She reached out then, her small hand covering his where it rested on his knee. "You saved me," she said. "That changed everything for me." The touch was electric, sending warmth up his arm that had nothing to do with the fire. Elias knew he should pull away, maintain the boundaries that kept them both safe. But her hand was so small, so warm, and it had been so long since anyone had touched him with kindness. "You don't know me," he said roughly. "The things I've done, I know you could have left me in that canyon. I know you gave up your bed and your peace. I know you look at me like I'm a person, not a debt to be collected or a prize to be won." Her thumb traced a small circle on his hand. "That's more kindness than I've known in a long time." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and they both pulled back. Mara stood quickly, mumbling something about getting some sleep, and retreated to the bed. Elias sat by the fire until dawn, thinking. He'd built this isolation carefully, brick by brick, keeping the world and its complications at bay. Now this slip of a girl had walked through his walls like they were made of smoke. Worse, he was starting to care what happened to her. In the morning, neither mentioned the night's conversation, but something had shifted between them. Their accidental touches came more frequently, lingering looks across the table. The space between them when they worked seemed charged with unspoken words. Elias knew it was dangerous. Not just the attraction, though that was hazard enough, but the hope she was kindling in him. The thought that maybe, just maybe, there could be something beyond mere survival. That kind of thinking got men killed out here, but when she smiled at him over dinner, or laughed at his poor attempt at humor, or looked at him with those sage green eyes full of trust he didn't deserve. Elias found his resolve weakening. The war had taught him to recognize a losing battle, He was beginning to suspect he was already in a one. The desert wind howled outside, and somewhere in the darkness, danger was still hunting for Mara Langley. But inside the cabin, for these stolen moments, they could pretend the world beyond the mesa didn't exist. It was a dangerous illusion, and Elias knew it couldn't last. But for now, it was enough. The sandstorm hit without warning on their 10th day together. Elias had seen the signs, the way the birds disappeared, the oppressive stillness in the air, the dark wall building on the horizon, but it moved faster than he'd anticipated. He'd barely gotten Ruth secured in the lean-to and the water barrels covered before the world turned red. "Get inside," he shouted to Mara, who was struggling to pull the last of the laundry from the line. The wind caught her skirts, nearly knocking her down. Elias grabbed her arm and half-carried, half-dragged her to the cabin, slamming the door behind them just as the storm hit in earnest. The walls shuddered under the assault. Sand forced its way through every crack and crevice, despite the rags Elias stuffed under the door and around the windows. The sound was deafening, a roaring, howling beast that seemed intent on tearing the cabin apart board by board. "How long will it last?" Mara shouted over the din, pressing a cloth to her face to filter the air. "Could be hours. Could be days." Elias was already moving, pulling supplies away from the walls, covering what he could with canvas. "Help me with this." They worked together in the dim light, the windows blocked by the storm. The temperature dropped rapidly as the sun was blotted out, and Elias built up the fire, knowing they'd need its warmth. By the time they'd done what they could, both were coughing from the dust and exhausted from fighting the wind that seemed to push through the very walls. "We'll have to wait it out," Elias said, settling onto the floor near the fire. "No going outside for any reason. People have gotten lost 3 feet from their own door in storms like this." Mara sank down beside him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "I've never seen anything like it. In Silver Creek, we'd get dust storms, but nothing like this. Desert's got its own rules." Elias said, "First one is respect, second is patience." The hours crawled by. They ate cold beans and hard bread, not wanting to waste firewood on cooking. The storm raged on, sometimes seeming to ease only to return with renewed fury. Sand accumulated in drifts against the walls, adding an eerie insulation that muffled sound. By the second night, the cabin fever was setting in. The constant noise, the gritty air, the forced proximity, it all wore on already frayed nerves. Mara paced the small space like a caged animal, while Elias cleaned his weapons for the 10th time. "I can't stand this," she finally burst out. "The waiting, the not knowing. Are they out there? Are they caught in this too? Is my brother safe?" She pressed her palms against her temples. "I feel like I'm going mad." Elias set down his rifle and moved to her. "Look at me," he said firmly. When she did, her eyes wild with panic, he took her shoulders gently. "Breathe. Deep breaths. That's it." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not usually so weak." "You're not weak. You're human." "This storm's enough to drive anyone half crazy." He guided her to sit by the fire. "Want to know what I did when I was trapped in a collapsed tunnel for 2 days during the war?" She nodded, focusing on his voice rather than the howling outside. "I told myself stories, remembered every book I'd ever read, every song I'd ever heard, built my childhood home in my mind, room by room, down to the scratches on the floorboards." He smiled slightly. "By the time they dug us out, I'd refined the whole farmhouse and added a second story." "Tell me about it," Mara said. "You're home." So he did, for the first time in years. Elias talked about the Indiana farm where he'd grown up, the apple orchard his father had planted, the creek where he'd learned to fish, his mother's garden, always fighting a losing battle against the rabbits, his sister Ruth, dancing in the barn during harvest celebrations. Mara listened, adding her own memories. The boarding house in St. Louis where she'd lived until her father's luck turned. Her mother's sewing room, always smelling of lavender and starch. The cat she'd hidden in her room for 3 months before anyone noticed. "His name was Thief," she said, laughing for the first time in days. "Because he'd steal anything shiny, Mother's thimble, father's cufflinks, coins from the dresser. He had a whole treasure hoard under my bed. The storm began to ease on the third morning, though the wind still gusted periodically. Elias ventured out to check on Ruth and survey the damage. The landscape had been completely transformed, familiar landmarks buried, new dunes formed where none had been before. When he returned, he found Mara attempting to cook with their dwindling supplies. She'd managed to make a decent stew from dried meat, beans, and the last of the wild onions. "We'll need supplies soon," he said, not mentioning that the nearest trading post was a 2-day ride. "Storm's blown itself out mostly. Should be clear by tomorrow." That evening, as they ate their meager meal, Mara seemed unusually quiet. "Finally," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. Fighting smart, not fair." Elias waited. "If I keep running, they'll never stop hunting. But if I could prove what really happened..." She looked up at him. There was a witness, Cornelius's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She saw him drinking, saw him following me, but she'd never speak against the Blackwoods. She has family to protect. Most people do, Elias observed. But what if she didn't have to speak? What if there was another way? As the night deepened and the wind finally stilled, they talked strategy. Mara's mind was sharp, seeing angles Elias hadn't considered. She knew the Blackwood family's routines, their weaknesses, their enemies. Years of being forced to navigate their world had given her insights she was only now recognizing as weapons. "William Blackwood gambles," she said, "badly. His father covered his debts to keep scandal away, but there's a man in Tucson he owes money to, someone even the Blackwoods fear. Dangerous game, getting between hard men and their money," Elias warned. More dangerous than hanging? He had no answer for that. Later, as the fire burned low, Mara said softly, "The storm's over." "Seems so. We survived it, together." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight, her face was luminous. "I don't think I could have managed alone." "You're stronger than you know," Elias said, meaning it. "Am I?" She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd brought from town, somehow preserved through everything. "Because right now, I don't feel strong. I feel..." She paused, searching for words. "I feel like if I don't touch you, I might disappear." The air between them crackled with more electricity than the storm had carried. Elias knew he should move away, maintain the careful distance that had kept them safe. But when she reached up to trace the scar on his temple with gentle fingers, his resolve crumbled like sand. "Mara," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons why we shouldn't, but Elias, we might not have tomorrow. We might not even have tonight, and I'm so tired of being afraid." He caught her hand, pressed it against his scarred cheek. "I'm no good for you. I'm broken, haunted. You deserve better than..." She silenced him with a kiss, soft and desperate and tasting of tears. For a moment, he froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as if she might vanish like smoke. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and pain dissolving in the heat between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara said, "You saved me. Let me save you back." The fire had burned to embers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the desert was still and quiet, as if the storm had never been. But inside the cabin, another storm was building, one made of need and longing and the desperate human desire for connection in a harsh world. Elias pulled her close again, burying his face in her hair. "You already have," he murmured. "You already have." They held each other as the last of the firelight died. Two souls finding shelter not from the sandstorm, but from the storms that raged within. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but tonight, in the aftermath of nature's fury, they found peace in each other's arms. The desert had taught them patience. The storm had taught them endurance. But it was in the quiet after the storm that they learned the most dangerous lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest risk was in not taking any risk at all. Dawn crept through the windows like an unwelcome visitor. finding them still entwined by the cold fireplace. Elias woke first, Mara's head resting on his chest, her dark hair spread across his shirt like spilled ink. For a moment, he allowed himself the luxury of peace, listening to her quiet breathing, feeling the weight of her against him, proof that the night hadn't been another dream. But reality had a way of intruding. His trained ears caught it first, the distant sound of horses, multiple riders moving steadily up the trail. He gently shook Mara awake, pressing a finger to her lips when her eyes fluttered open. "Company coming," he whispered. "Get dressed, quickly." The fear returned to her eyes instantly, but she moved without panic, gathering her things with practiced efficiency. Elias was already checking his weapons, calculating angles and distances. 3 riders, maybe 4, still a mile out, but closing. "The root cellar," he said, pulling aside the worn rug to reveal a trap door. "It's not comfortable, but it's hidden. What about you?" "I'll handle them. Go." "Elias, no, if they—" He caught her face between his hands. "Trust me, I've survived worse than whatever's coming up that trail, but I can't protect us both if I'm worried about you being in the line of fire." She kissed him quickly, fiercely, then disappeared into the cellar. Elias replaced the rug, moved the table over it, and scattered some old newspapers on top. Then he went to the porch, rifle in hand but held casually, to wait. The riders came into view as the sun climbed higher. 4 men, dust-covered and hard-faced. The lead rider was young, perhaps 25, with the kind of cruel good looks that money and privilege bred. William Blackwood, Elias guessed. The others were hired guns. Their type as familiar as sunrise. "Morning," Elias said calmly as they reined up just out of comfortable shooting range. "Smart men." "Captain Monroe," William said, touching his hat with mocking courtesy. "Or should I say, former captain. Your reputation precedes you." "Just Elias now." "What brings you boys up here?" "Looking for something that belongs to us, a thieving, murdering woman who might have passed this way." William's eyes were cold as January ice. "Red-headed girl named Rose Garrett. Killed a man in Silver Creek. Stole a horse and a considerable sum of money." The lie was smooth, practiced. They'd changed her appearance. Her name added theft to make locals less sympathetic. Elias kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," he said. "Red hair would stand out in these parts." "Mind if we look around?" William asked, though he was already gesturing for his men to dismount. "As a matter of fact, I do." Elias shifted slightly, the rifle still casual but ready. "Man's home is his sanctuary. Sure you understand." The hired guns tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. William held up a hand to stop them. "Now, Captain, we're all reasonable men here. We've tracked our quarry to this area. Her horse was found dead at the base of your mesa. Seems mighty coincidental. Desert's full of dead horses, full of dead everything." Elias met William's stare steadily. "But you're welcome to water your mounts before you move on." "See, that's where we have a problem." William dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "My father's dying. Doc says he might not last the week. His final wish is to see justice done for his attempted murder." He paused, letting that sink in. "Now, we can do this civilized, or my boys can turn this place into kindling while we look for her. Your choice." Elias considered his options. 4 against 1. Open ground. Mara hidden but trapped if they searched thoroughly. He needed to buy time or change the game. "Your father," he said slowly. "Cornelius Blackwood. Heard of him. Also heard he likes his whiskey and his women young. Heard his first 2 wives died mysterious-like." William's face darkened. "Careful, old man. Just sharing what I heard." "Also heard his son has debts all over the territory. Must be hard, waiting for the old man to die so you can inherit." Elias smiled coldly. "Unless, of course, someone helped him along. Mighty convenient, blaming a woman who can't defend herself." The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. One of the hired guns, a scarred Mexican with silver conchos on his vest, shifted uneasily. "You calling me a liar?" William's hand moved to his pistol. "I'm saying the desert makes men see what they want to see. Maybe you saw a red-headed thief. Maybe you saw a chance to solve all your problems at once." William drew, but Elias was already moving. The rifle came up smooth as thought, and his first shot took the Mexican in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second caught another gunman in the thigh. Then he was diving behind the water trough as bullets splintered the porch rails where he'd been standing. The fight was brief, but vicious. Elias had position and experience, but they had numbers. A ricochet caught him along the ribs. Another grazed his shooting arm. But when the gun smoke cleared, 2 hired guns were down. The third was helping the Mexican stay in the saddle, and William Blackwood was backing toward his horse, his fancy pistol empty. "This isn't over," William snarled, blood running from where a wood splinter had caught his cheek. "We'll be back with more men. You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not," Elias agreed, keeping his rifle trained on them as they mounted up. "But I can protect her today." They rode off. The wounded men slumped in their saddles. Elias waited until they were out of sight before allowing himself to sag against the doorframe. Blood seeped through his shirt, and his arm felt like fire. Mara burst from the cellar before he could call for her, her face white with fear. "You're hurt." "Had worse," he said, but let her help him inside. She was efficient, cutting away his shirt, cleaning the wounds with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth. The furrow along his ribs was shallow but long, the arm just a graze. Her hands were steady, but he could see tears on her cheeks. "You could have died," she said quietly, as she wrapped bandages around his chest. "Because of me." "No," he corrected. "Because of them. You didn't start this, Mara. I should go, leave before they come back." "Where would you go?" He caught her hand. "They know you're here now. Running just means dying tired." She sank down beside him on the bed, her composure finally cracking. "He said my name wrong, called me Rose, said I had red hair. They're going to make me disappear, aren't they? Kill me and say the real murderer was someone else entirely. That was the plan." Elias agreed. But plans can change. He told her then about the Apache cave system, 5 miles north through terrible country. Hidden, defensive, with water and multiple exits. She listened, memorizing every detail. "We'll leave tonight," he decided. "Take only what we need. They'll expect us to run south toward Mexico. We go north instead. What about your home? You can't just abandon it because of me." Elias looked around the cabin, his self-imposed prison for the past year. "It's just walls and a roof. Home." He touched her face gently. "Home might be something else now." That afternoon, they prepared. Elias taught her to load his spare revolver, showed her how to sight along the barrel. Her hands shook at first, but determination steadied them. They packed light ammunition, food, medical supplies, bed rolls. Mara insisted on bringing her diary and the embroidered handkerchief. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, Elias saddled Ruth and prepared a makeshift pack for supplies. His wounds ached, but adrenaline kept him moving. Mara had changed into the rough clothes, her hair pinned up under an old hat. In the dying light, she could pass for a young man at a distance. "Ready?" he asked. She took a last look at the cabin that had been their sanctuary. "Elias, what we have, is it real? Or is it just 2 desperate people clinging to each other?" He considered lying, making it easier for both of them. Instead, he told the truth. "I don't know, but I know when you're not with me, the world goes gray, and when you are, I remember why surviving isn't the same as living." She smiled through tears. "That's enough. That's more than enough." They mounted Ruth together, Mara in front, Elias's arms around her as he took the reins. The desert night enveloped them, vast and full of danger. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, a monument to the life Elias was leaving behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, pursuit, possible death. But as they rode into the darkness, Mara's warmth against his chest, her trust in his guidance absolute. Elias felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war: hope. It was fragile as a desert flower, but like those stubborn blooms, it had found a way to grow in the harshest ground. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But beneath them, two souls rode north as one, leaving behind everything but each other. The Apache caves were a labyrinth carved by ancient waters, hidden in a canyon so twisted that even the noon sun barely touched its depths. Elias had discovered them years ago while tracking a wounded deer, and they'd served as a refuge more than once. Now, as he and Mara made camp in the largest chamber, he was grateful for their shelter. 5 days had passed since they'd fled the cabin. 5 days of hard riding, sleeping in shifts, starting at every sound. Ruth was exhausted, and so were they. Elias's wounds had reopened twice during the journey, and Mara had developed a persistent cough from the cold nights. "It's like a cathedral," Mara whispered, looking up at the cave ceiling where mineral deposits created natural pillars and arches. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a rhythmic sound that echoed through the chambers. Elias built a small fire near the cave mouth, positioned so the smoke would dissipate before it could be seen from outside. The warmth was meager, but welcome. As Mara unpacked their supplies, he noticed her hands trembling. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. "Yesterday, I think." She tried to smile. "Been saving the food for you. You need strength to heal. We both need strength." He divided their remaining jerky and hardtack equally. "Can't protect you if you faint from hunger." They ate in companionable silence, the fire casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind sang through the canyon. It should have been peaceful, but Elias could see the fear eating at Mara, wearing her down more than any physical hardship. That night, as they lay close for warmth, she finally broke. "They're going to find us, aren't they? We can't hide forever." "No," Elias admitted. "We can't." "Then what are we doing? Just delaying the inevitable?" He pulled her closer, feeling her tears against his neck. "We're buying time. Time to think, to plan. Time for—" He paused, not sure how to voice what he'd been considering. For what? For them to make a mistake. William Blackwood's not patient. He's used to getting what he wants quickly. The longer this drags on, the more desperate he'll become. Desperate men make errors. She was quiet for a long moment. Or they become more dangerous. That too. The next morning brought troubling news. Elias had set snares near the water source, and when he went to check them, he found fresh boot prints. Someone had been scouting the area, though they'd missed the concealed cave entrance. Time was running shorter than he'd hoped. He returned to find Mara sketching in her diary, capturing the cave's strange beauty in quick, sure strokes. She looked up as he entered, read his expression immediately. "How close?" "Close enough. We need to move again tomorrow." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. "Where?" "There's an abandoned trading post 2 days north. Last I knew, some Mexican sheep herders used it seasonally. Might be empty now, might not, but it's on the old freight road. From there, we could catch a supply wagon heading to Fort Grant." "A military fort?" Hope flickered in her eyes. "Federal troops don't care much about territorial disputes, but they do maintain law and order. Might be able to get you on a stage heading east, away from Blackwood influence." "What about you?" He hesitated. The plan had always been to get her to safety, then disappear back into the wilderness. But somewhere between the cabin and the cave, that plan had become painful to contemplate. "We'll figure that out when we get there," he said finally. That afternoon, while Mara slept fitfully, Elias explored the cave system, looking for alternate exits and defensive positions. In a smaller chamber, he found something that stopped him cold. Apache paintings on the wall, depicting warriors and horses, hunts and ceremonies. But among them was something newer, a message written in charcoal. "The one-eared captain is welcome here, the woman with him also. The hunters who follow are not K's." Kose, an Apache scout Elias had once freed from a bounty hunter's rope. The message was weeks old, but its meaning was clear. They had allies, or at least The Blackwoods had enemies. When he returned to Mara, she was awake, hugging her knees to her chest. In the dim light, she looked younger than her years, fragile as a bird. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, making them desperate. What if we didn't run? What if we made them come to us?" Elias sat beside her. "That's dangerous thinking. More dangerous than being hunted like animals. At least if we choose the ground, we have some advantage." She met his eyes. "I'm tired of running. Elias, I want to fight." He studied her face, seeing not the terrified girl he'd found by the creek, but a woman tempered by hardship. "What did you have in mind?" "The trading post you mentioned. If it's on the freight road, it's public, witnesses, and if William comes after us there." She smiled grimly. "Well, attacking federal property would be a mistake, wouldn't it?" "You're assuming the post is federal." "No, but William might assume that, especially if someone told him it was." Despite everything, Elias felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Devious, I like it." They spent the rest of the day planning, sketching maps in the dirt, discussing contingencies. For the first time since leaving the cabin, Mara seemed energized rather than defeated. She asked intelligent questions, spotted flaws in his tactics, suggested improvements. As night fell, they prepared for what might be their last peaceful evening. Mara heated water in their single pot, using it to clean Elias's wounds properly. The gash along his ribs was healing well, though it would leave another scar for his collection. "Does it hurt?" she asked, applying a poultice of herbs she'd gathered. "Everything hurts when you get to my age," he said, trying for lightness. "You're not that old." Her fingers traced the scar on his temple, then the one on his shoulder, learning the map of his battles. "Just well-traveled. That's a kind way of putting it." She finished with the bandages, then surprised him by kissing each scar gently. "These are proof you survived," she said. "Proof you're hard to kill. That gives me hope." The gesture undid him. He pulled her onto his lap, holding her as if she might vanish. "Mara, I know," she whispered. "I know we might not have tomorrow, but we have tonight." In the cave's shelter, with danger circling ever closer, they found solace in each other. Not the desperate passion of their first night, but something deeper. A communion of souls who'd found their match in the unlikeliest place. They made love slowly, carefully, mindful of his wounds, but needful of the connection. Afterward, they lay entwined, skin to skin, heartbeats synchronizing. Mara traced patterns on his chest, and he played with her hair, neither willing to waste these precious moments on sleep. "Tell me something true," she said softly. "Something you've never told anyone." Elias thought for a long moment. "I used to write poetry, before the war. Terrible stuff about flowers and sunsets and pretty girls at church socials." She lifted her head to look at him. "You? Poetry?" "Burned it all when I enlisted. Seemed foolish, going to war with poems in my pocket." "I would have liked to read them." "No," he said firmly. "You wouldn't have. They were genuinely awful." She laughed, the sound echoing off the cave walls like music. "Will you write more? When this is over? Maybe, if I have the right inspiration." She kissed him then, soft and sweet. "I'll hold you to that, Captain Monroe." Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the canyon like a living thing, but in the cave, wrapped in each other and their fragile hopes. Elias and Mara found a moment of perfect peace. Tomorrow would bring fresh dangers, new challenges. The trading post gambit might work or might get them both killed. But tonight, they had this, the warmth of the fire, the shelter of stone, and the fierce, impossible love that had bloomed between them in the desert's harsh embrace. It was more than most people got, Elias reflected, more than he'd ever thought to have again. As sleep finally claimed them, Mara murmured against his chest, "No regrets. Elias, whatever happens, no regrets." He pressed his lips to her hair, breathing in her scent. "None," he agreed. "Not a single one." The fire burned low, casting its fading light on two figures who'd found in each other what they'd never thought to find again. A reason to fight, a reason to hope, a reason to believe that tomorrow was worth facing. Whatever it might bring. The pursuit began at dawn, just as they were breaking camp. Elias heard them first, horses moving fast through the canyon below. No longer trying for stealth. He counted at least 6 riders, maybe more. William Blackwood had brought a small army. "Move," he said tersely, helping Mara onto Ruth. Their supplies were already packed, a habit that had saved their lives more than once. He swung up behind her, ignoring the protest from his wounded ribs. They burst from the cave at full gallop, scattering the carefully arranged brush that had hidden the entrance. Shouts erupted behind them as they were spotted. The chase was on. The canyon was a death trap, narrow and winding. But Elias knew every twist and turn. He urged Ruth through passages barely wide enough for a horse, heard curses and the crash of riders trying to follow. A bullet whined off the rocks to their left, sending chips of stone flying. "Hold on," he told Mara, feeling her grip tighten on the saddle horn. Ruth was game, but carrying 2 riders was slowing her down. They needed to reach open ground where her stamina could tell. They exploded from the canyon onto a wide plateau, and Elias's heart sank. 3 more riders were waiting, spread out to cut off escape routes. They'd been herded like cattle. "The rocks," Mara said urgently, pointing to a cluster of boulders 50 yards east. "We can make a stand." It was a slim chance, but the only one they had. Elias turned Ruth sharply, racing for cover as rifles cracked behind them. He felt the mare stumble, catch herself, stumble again. When he glanced down, he saw blood streaming from her flank. They made the rocks just as Ruth's legs gave out. Elias pulled Mara clear as the horse collapsed. Her breathing labored. "I'm sorry, girl," he whispered, then put her out of her misery with a single shot. "Elias!" Mara was already returning fire with the revolver he'd taught her to use, forcing the riders to keep their distance. He joined her, picking his shots carefully. They had ammunition, but not enough for a prolonged siege. The Blackwood men spread out, surrounding the rocks. Someone with a booming voice, not William, called out, "Give up the woman, Monroe! No need for you to die over Blackwood business." "Can't do that," Elias shouted back. "The lady's under my protection." Your protection?" William Blackwood's laugh was ugly. "You're trapped like rats. Old man, how exactly are you protecting her?" Elias and Mara exchanged glances. Her face was pale but determined, streaked with dust and Ruth's blood. "I won't let them take me," she said quietly. "Not alive." "It won't come to that," he promised, though he wasn't sure how he'd keep that promise. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on foot in hostile country. The sun climbed higher, turning the rocks into an oven. The Blackwood men were patient, taking occasional shots to keep them pinned down. Elias's water was running low, and Mara's cough had returned, harsh and dry. "I should surrender," she said during a lull. "They don't want you, just me." "We've had this discussion. That was before." She gestured at their dire situation. "Elias, I can't watch you die for me." He reached over, took her hand. "Then close your eyes." Despite everything, she laughed, a cracked, desperate sound, but genuine. "You impossible man, that's why you love me." The words hung between them, unplanned but true. Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." Before Elias could respond, a new sound reached them. Horses approaching from the north, many horses. His gut tightened. More Blackwood men would end this quickly. But the riders who crested the hill wore blue uniforms. A cavalry patrol from Fort Grant, 20 men strong, led by a young lieutenant who looked fresh from West Point. The Blackwood men milled in confusion, caught between the soldiers and their quarry. William tried to take control, spurring his horse toward the officer. "Lieutenant, I'm William Blackwood from Silver Creek. These fugitives are wanted for murder. We're attempting a lawful capture." The lieutenant, whose insignia read Morrison looked skeptical. "This is federal land, Mr. Blackwood. Any captures here need to go through proper military channels. Do you have a warrant?" "We don't need a warrant to retrieve stolen property and murderers." "Actually," Lieutenant Morrison said mildly, "you do. Captain Monroe? Is that you behind those rocks?" Elias stood slowly, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. "It is. Lieutenant, good to see you again." They'd met once, briefly. When Morrison was still a sergeant, Elias had helped track down deserters who'd been terrorizing local settlements. The young man had a good memory. "Sir, this man's trying to abduct my wife," Elias said clearly. "Claims she murdered someone, but has no proof, no warrant, nothing but hired guns and violent intentions." "Wife," William sputtered. She's engaged to my father." "Was," Mara said, standing beside Elias, "until he tried to force himself on me and fell from his own balcony in a drunken stupor. I fled for my life, and Elias gave me sanctuary. We were married 3 days ago." She held up her hand, where Elias's mother's ring, the one he'd carried for years, gleamed on her finger. It was a lie, of course, but a good one. They'd discussed it during their planning, and Elias had given her the ring for just this possibility. Frontier marriages were often informal affairs, and proving they weren't married would be as hard as proving they were. Lieutenant Morrison looked between the two groups, clearly calculating the politics. The Blackwoods were powerful, but attacking a decorated Union veteran and his wife on federal land was a serious matter. "I think," he said finally, "everyone should come back to Fort Grant. We can sort this out properly there." "No!" William's control finally snapped. He went for his gun, and chaos erupted. Elias shoved Mara down as bullets flew. The soldiers, trained and disciplined, made short work of it. When the gunsmoke cleared, 2 of the Blackwood men were dead. 3 were wounded, and William was on the ground, clutching a shoulder that would never work quite right again. Lieutenant Morrison surveyed the scene with distaste. "Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest for attacking federal troops. The rest of you, drop your weapons." As the soldiers rounded up the survivors, Morrison approached Elias and Mara. "That was brave. What you did, stupid, but brave." "Story of my life," Elias said wearily. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him aware of every ache and pain. "Is it true? About the marriage?" Mara squeezed Elias's hand. "Every word," she said firmly. Morrison studied them, then nodded. "The fort chaplain can make it official, if you'd like, assuming that's what you both want." Elias looked at Mara, dusty and exhausted, fierce and beautiful. "What do you say, Mrs. Monroe? Want to make an honest man of me?" Her smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." The ride to Fort Grant was surreal after the violence and flight of recent days. Mara rode with Elias on a borrowed horse, William and his men under guard behind them. She kept touching the ring, as if to assure herself it was real. "Your mother's?" she asked quietly. "She'd have liked you," Elias said. "Would have said you were too good for me." She'd have been right. As the fort walls came into view, Elias felt something he'd thought lost forever, the possibility of a future. It wouldn't be easy. The Blackwoods would want revenge. There would be legal challenges. Danger still lurked. But for the first time since the war, he had something worth fighting for besides mere survival. "No regrets?" Mara asked, echoing her words from the cave. "None," he assured her, "except maybe not finding you sooner." She leaned back against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as they rode toward their uncertain but shared tomorrow. The desert had brought them together, tested them, nearly broken them, but in the end, it had failed to separate them. Behind them, the sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and harsh as the love that had bloomed between them. Ahead lay Fort Grant, sanctuary and new beginning rolled into one. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The scarred soldier and the runaway bride who'd found in each other what they'd never dared to hope for. Home, Elias thought, wasn't a place after all. It was this. Mara in his arms, her trust in him absolute, their hearts beating as one against all odds. The war had taken everything from him, but the desert, in its strange mercy, had given him something infinitely precious in return, a reason to live, not just survive. And her name was Mara Monroe. The decision to return to Silver Creek came after 3 weeks at Fort Grant. The military chaplain had indeed married them, with Lieutenant Morrison and his sergeant as witnesses, but Elias knew they couldn't hide behind federal walls forever. The Blackwood's reach was long, and Cornelius, despite his injuries, had survived his fall. The old man was demanding justice, or revenge, depending on who told it. "We could go east," Mara suggested one evening as they walked the fort's perimeter. "Start fresh where the Blackwood name means nothing." "We could," Elias agreed. "But you'd always be looking over your shoulder. And your brother, Thomas." The boy had been in Mara's thoughts constantly. Word had reached them that the Blackwoods were keeping him as security against his sister's return. It was kidnapping, plain and simple. But in Silver Creek, the Blackwoods were the law. "There's another way," Elias said. "We go back, face them in their own territory. But this time, we don't go alone." The plan took shape slowly. Elias still had friends from his lawman days, men who'd grown tired of the Blackwoods' stranglehold on the territory. Lieutenant Morrison, offended by William's attack on federal authority, agreed to provide an escort to Silver Creek, not to intervene, but to ensure a fair trial. Most importantly, Elias had spent days teaching Mara the intricacies of territorial law. She had a sharp mind for legal matters, and her diary proved invaluable. Every threat, every coercion, every witness to Cornelius's behavior. She'd recorded it all. "You're building a case," she realized during one of their sessions. "Not me," Elias corrected. "You are. I'm just showing you how to present it." They also had an unexpected ally. Father Miguel, the old priest who'd served Silver Creek for 30 years, had written to them at the fort. His message was cryptic but clear. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes he needs earthly assistance to reveal the truth. The journey back to Silver Creek felt like riding into the maw of a beast. Mara sat straight in the saddle, wearing a proper dress they'd purchased from the fort sutler, her hair pinned up respectably. She looked every inch a lady, but Elias knew the steel beneath the silk. Their escort of 6 cavalrymen drew stares as they entered town, windows filled with faces, and the street cleared before them. By the time they reached the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Cornelius Blackwood waited on the steps, leaning heavily on a cane but very much alive. His face was a map of old sins, dissipation, cruelty, and now a fresh bitterness directed at Mara. "So the murderess returns," he called out. "Come to finish what you started?" "I've come to tell the truth," Mara replied calmly. "All of it." The trial was set for the next morning. That night, in the hotel under cavalry guard, Elias and Mara prepared their strategy one final time. "What if the judge is in their pocket?" she asked. "Judge Harriman's honest, or as honest as they come out here. The jury's another matter, but we only need to create reasonable doubt. And if we can't," Elias took her hands, "then we've got 6 soldiers and fast horses outside." She laughed despite her nerves. "My husband, the romantic." "Practical," he corrected, then kissed her. "But I'd rather win this clean." The courthouse was packed the next morning. Judge Harriman, a thin man with the face of a disappointed preacher, called for order repeatedly. The prosecutor, brought in from Tucson to give the appearance of fairness, laid out the case. Mara had attacked Cornelius Blackwood in a fit of rage over their impending marriage, pushing him from the balcony with intent to kill. When Elias stood to present the defense, Mara had insisted he speak for her. The room buzzed with whispers. His reputation still carried weight, and his marriage to the accused added drama to an already sensational trial. "Gentlemen of the jury," Elias began, his voice carrying the authority of years commanding men. "You're asked to believe that this woman, weighing perhaps 100 pounds soaking wet, overpowered a man twice her size, and threw him from a balcony. I ask you to consider another possibility, that Cornelius Blackwood, drunk and aggressive as multiple witnesses will attest, assaulted my wife and fell due to his own inebriation and violence. The prosecution's case relied heavily on William's testimony, but under Elias's cross-examination, cracks appeared. William hadn't actually seen the push, he'd seen them struggle and his father fall. He admitted his father had been drinking heavily. When pressed about the condition of the balcony railing, he grew evasive. "Isn't it true," Elias pressed, "that your father had been warned about that railing, that it was damaged in last spring's storms and never properly repaired?" "I don't recall," William said stiffly. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." Elias produced a work order from the local carpenter, dated 2 months before the incident, estimating repairs for the Blackwood house, including replacement of deteriorated balcony railing. Urgent. The real breakthrough came with Father Miguel's testimony. The old priest, protected by his collar from Blackwood retribution, spoke quietly but devastatingly about Cornelius's character. "I've buried 2 Mrs. Blackwoods," he said. "Both young, both dead under questionable circumstances. I counseled Cornelius to seek help for his tempers, his drinking. He laughed in my face." He looked directly at the jury. "When Miss Langley came to me, frightened and seeking guidance, I told her to run. God forgive me. I should have told her to run farther." Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, surprised everyone by taking the stand. Whether from courage or calculation, the Blackwoods' power was clearly waning. She corroborated Mara's account. Yes, Mr. Blackwood had been drunk. Yes, he'd followed Miss Langley upstairs. Yes, she'd heard sounds of struggle and Mara's cries for help. "And the railing?" Elias asked. "Rotten." "Mrs. Chen said flatly. "I warned Mr. Cornelius many times. He said fixing it was women's foolishness." When Mara finally took the stand, the courtroom was silent. She told her story simply, without embellishment. Her father's debts, Cornelius's threats against Thomas, the forced engagement, that final night. "He cornered me on the balcony," she said, her voice steady though tears ran down her cheeks. "Tore my dress, said things I won't repeat. When I tried to get past him, he grabbed me. We struggled. He was so drunk he could barely stand. When he lunged at me again, I pushed him away, just trying to escape. The railing cracked like kindling, and he fell." "Did you intend to kill him?" the prosecutor demanded. "I intended to survive," Mara replied. "If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." In his closing argument, Elias didn't ask for sympathy. He asked for justice. The law recognizes self-defense. He said, it recognizes that sometimes, in the moment of crisis, we must act to preserve our own lives. Mara Monroe did nothing more than any of you would do if attacked. That her attacker's own negligence, the railing he refused to repair, contributed to his injuries is not her fault, but his. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours that felt like 3 years. When they returned, Cornelius Blackwood's face was already darkening with rage, as if he knew what was coming. "We find the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense." The courtroom erupted. Cheers from some, outrage from others. Cornelius struggled to his feet, pointing his cane at Mara like a weapon. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You think you've won? I'll see you ruined. Both of you." Judge Harriman gavelled for order. "Mr. Blackwood, you'll maintain decorum or be held in contempt. The jury has spoken. Mrs. Monroe is free to go." But Elias wasn't finished. "Your Honor, there's the matter of Thomas Langley, Mrs. Monroe's brother. He's been held against his will by the Blackwood family." "That's a separate matter," the judge began. "Is it?" Elias produced another document. "This is a witnessed statement from Thomas himself, smuggled out by a sympathetic servant. He details being locked in his room, threatened with being sent to work in the mines, prevented from attending school. I believe that constitutes unlawful imprisonment of a minor." Harriman's face was grim. "Sheriff, you'll investigate these allegations immediately. If the boy is being held against his will, He's to be released to his sister's custody at once. The Blackwoods had no choice but to comply. That afternoon, a pale but unharmed Thomas was reunited with Mara in tearful embrace. Watching them, Elias felt something ease in his chest. They'd won more than a legal battle. They'd broken the Blackwood stranglehold on the town. That evening, as they prepared to leave Silver Creek, Judge Harriman had strongly suggested the Monroes might be happier elsewhere. Cornelius made one last appearance. He caught them loading a wagon outside the hotel, his son William beside him. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "My reputation, my family standing. For what, a worthless girl?" "For justice," Elias said mildly. "Something you've avoided for too long." Cornelius raised his cane as if to strike, but Elias caught it easily, his own strength still formidable despite his wounds. "Go home, old man," he said quietly. "Count yourself lucky you're still breathing. Your wives weren't so fortunate." Something in Elias's eyes must have penetrated even Cornelius's rage. The old man stepped back, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. As the Blackwoods retreated, Mara took Elias's arm. "It's really over? This part is," he agreed. "Now comes the rest of our lives." Thomas, still thin but already showing more spirit, climbed onto the wagon seat. "Where are we going?" Elias and Mara exchanged glances. They'd talked about it, made plans. California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere fresh, where they could build something clean and new. "West," Elias said finally. "As far west as we can go." As they rode out of Silver Creek, Lieutenant Morrison's cavalry escort ensuring their safe passage, Mara leaned against Elias's shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I never thanked you properly for saving my life. You saved mine right back." He replied, "Made it worth living again. I'd say we're even." Behind them, Silver Creek faded into the dust. Ahead, the sun was setting over mountains that promised new beginnings. Thomas was already pestering them with questions about their destination, his natural curiosity reasserting itself after weeks of captivity. "Will there be schools where we're going?" he asked. "Good ones?" "The best we can find," Mara promised. "And books? All the books you can read." The boy settled back, satisfied. Elias clicked to the horses, urging them on. He was leaving behind his isolation, his self-imposed exile, the safety of solitude. In exchange, he'd gained a wife who matched him in courage and cleverness, a young brother-in-law to help raise, and the chance to build something worthwhile. It wasn't what he'd planned when he'd settled in that lonely cabin. But then, the best things in life rarely were. Sometimes they came to you crying in the darkness, desperate and afraid, and you either stepped up to meet them or let them pass by. Elias Monroe had stepped up, and as the stars began to emerge in the desert sky, he knew with bone-deep certainty that it was the best decision he'd ever made. 3 months later, the Arizona Territory stretched endlessly before them as Elias and Mara stood on the rise overlooking their new homestead. The land was different here, 200 miles from Silver Creek greener, with a stream that ran year-round and cottonwoods that promised shade in the brutal summers. Thomas was down by the water, trying to catch fish with a homemade pole, his laughter carrying on the clean morning air. "It needs work," Elias said, surveying the abandoned ranch house they'd purchased with the last of his savings and a small inheritance Mara's mother had left her. "Everything worth having does," Mara replied, slipping her hand into his. The wedding ring caught the light, no longer a prop for deception but a true symbol of their union. The trial and their escape from Silver Creek had made them minor celebrities in the territory. The story of the war veteran who'd stood up to the Blackwoods had spread, embellished with each telling. They'd received offers to settle in various towns, even a suggestion that Elias run for sheriff in Prescott. He'd turned them all down. He'd had enough of law and politics. All he wanted now was peace and the family he'd never thought to have. They worked through the morning, Elias replacing broken boards while Mara swept years of dust and neglect from the house. By noon, they'd made enough progress to see the bones of what could be a real home, not just a shelter from the storm. "Riders coming," Thomas called from his fishing spot. The boy had developed sharp eyes and ears during his captivity, survival skills that would serve him well in frontier life. Elias reached for his rifle, old habits dying hard, but relaxed when he recognized the lead rider, Father Miguel, accompanied by 2 men from Silver Creek, the banker Harrison and the merchant Davies, both men who'd suffered under Blackwood monopoly. "Friends," Father Miguel called out as they approached. "We bring news and gifts." They dismounted, and Elias noticed the pack horses laden with supplies. Harrison, a thin man with nervous hands, stepped forward. "Mr. Monroe, Mrs. Monroe, we wanted to thank you properly. What you did back there, it changed everything." "How so?" Mara asked, offering water to the travelers. Davies, broader and more confident, took up the tale. "Cornelius Blackwood left town 2 weeks ago, sold his holdings for whatever he could get and headed back east. William went with him. Without their stranglehold, Silver Creek can finally grow properly. And these," Father Miguel gestured to the supplies, "are a small token of appreciation from grateful citizens. Building materials, seeds for planting, books for young Thomas." Books. Thomas abandoned his fishing immediately, earning laughter from the adults. They spent the afternoon unloading and talking. The news from Silver Creek was encouraging. New businesses opening, fair elections planned, even talk of building a proper school. The shadow that had lain over the town for decades was finally lifting. As the sun began to sink, Father Miguel asked to speak with Elias privately. They walked to the stream, watching Thomas show Mara his fishing techniques with great enthusiasm and little success. "I have something else for you," the priest said, producing an envelope. "A letter that came to the church, addressed to Mrs. Monroe. I thought it best to deliver it personally." Elias recognized the legal seals. His jaw tightened. "The Blackwoods?" "No, read it. It's good news. I think." The letter was from a law firm in St. Louis, Mara's mother's family, estranged since her marriage to a gambling man, had been searching for their granddaughter and great-grandson. They were people of means, shocked by news of what had befallen the children, and eager to help. A trust had been established for Thomas's education, and a modest sum set aside for Mara. "They want to be in our lives," Mara said wonderingly after reading it. "After all these years of silence, they want to know us. Family can surprise you," Father Miguel said gently, "sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. But the offer of connection is precious." That evening, after their visitors had departed with promises to return for the wedding celebration they insisted on throwing, the Monroe family sat on their new porch watching the sunset. Thomas was reading one of his new books by lamplight, occasionally sharing interesting facts about ancient Rome. Mara was knitting, badly, but with determination. Elias simply sat, rifle across his lap out of habit, but relaxed in a way he hadn't been in years. "I've been thinking," Mara said, "about what you said once, about writing poetry." Elias groaned. "I thought we agreed never to speak of that." "No, listen." She set aside her knitting. "You said you burned them all when you went to war, like you were burning away the part of you that could see beauty, that could create instead of destroy. Maybe I was. But you're not at war anymore. And I think," she touched his scarred face gently, "I think that part of you isn't dead, just sleeping, waiting." Thomas looked up from his book. "You write poetry. Elias, would you teach me?" "I don't really. Please." The boy's eagerness was hard to resist. "I want to learn everything. Poetry and fishing and shooting and how to build things. Everything you know." Elias felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bands he hadn't realized were still there. "Everything I know wouldn't fill a thimble. Boy." "That's not true," Mara said firmly. "You know about survival, about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything, about second chances and new beginnings." She smiled. "Maybe those are things worth putting into words." That night, after Thomas had gone to bed and Mara lay sleeping beside him, Elias found himself at the rough table with paper and pencil. The words came slowly at first, rusty with disuse. But they came. He wrote about the desert and its terrible beauty, about a woman's tears in the darkness and the light she'd brought to his life, about redemption found in the most unexpected places. It wasn't good poetry, might never be, but it was honest. More importantly, it was creation instead of destruction, building rather than tearing down. When Mara found him still writing at dawn, she read over his shoulder, her arms wrapping around him from behind. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "It's rough, like everything else out here." "No?" She kissed his temple, right on the old scar. "It's perfect, because it's real and it's yours, and you're sharing it with us." Thomas stumbled out, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Are you really writing poetry? Can I read it?" And so began their new rhythm. Days of hard work building their ranch, evenings of study and creation. Thomas proved brilliant, devouring books and knowledge with equal hunger. Mara's garden began to take shape, fighting the desert with determination and slowly winning. Elias found himself teaching not just survival skills, but the harder lessons of judgment and mercy, strength and gentleness. The house grew room by room. The stream was diverted for irrigation. Cattle were purchased. A small herd that would grow with careful management. Neighbors, few and far between, proved friendly and helpful. The Monroe Ranch became a way station for travelers, known for its hospitality and the strange sight of a former soldier reading poetry by the fire while his wife debated philosophy with whoever would engage, and a young boy asked endless questions about everything under the sun. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, Elias found Mara standing by the grave they'd made for Ruth, his faithful horse. She'd planted wildflowers there, and they bloomed in defiant color against the red earth. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The solitude? The simplicity of being alone?" He considered lying, but they'd built their marriage on truth. "Sometimes, for about 5 seconds. Then I remember what alone really felt like, and I'm grateful all over again." She leaned into him. "We've come so far from that night by the creek. Miles and years and lifetimes," he agreed. "Was it worth it? Everything we went through?" Elias looked back at their house, where Thomas was practicing his letters by lamplight, determined to have the best handwriting in the territory. He thought of the poems accumulating in his drawer, the cattle growing fat on good grass, the neighbors who'd become friends. Mostly, he thought of the woman beside him, who'd transformed his exile into a homecoming. "Every scar," he said, "every nightmare, every bullet and every mile of running, worth it all." She smiled, that transformative expression that still caught his breath. "Then let's go home. Captain Monroe, together." "Just Elias," he corrected, as he always did. "No," she said softly. "You'll always be captain to me, the man who rescued the desperate girl by the creek, who fought for her, believed in her, loved her when she couldn't love herself. My captain, my savior, my heart." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the first stars appearing in the vast Arizona sky, Elias reflected that the war had indeed scarred him. But scars, he'd learned, were just proof of survival. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they were the map that led you home. The lamp glowed warm in the window. Thomas called out that supper was ready. He'd been learning to cook with mixed results. Mara laughed and quickened her pace. And Elias Monroe, no longer lost, no longer alone, followed his family into the light. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the Arizona territory with Elias and Mara. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story? Are you driving through your own desert landscapes, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps stealing a moment of escape during a busy day? Please share in the comments below where Wild West Campfire finds you tonight. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts about Elias and Mara's story. Did their love touch your heart as it did mine? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunsets.